legitimacy would be that government entitled to coerce people to obey it. So like just on like the note of political obligation, I feel like we're going to see some problems because like your utility maximizing perspective for political authority would basically say that like the government should only command things in which would maximize utility, and this would like breach like a couple aspects of authority, including content independence and supremacy. So like content independence would denote like the state's authority um, is to a large extent independent of the context of its laws. Like for instance, if the state makes an incorrect or foolish law, they still can force it. But under your worldview, they couldn't if it didn't maximize utility. This would also, fail to justify supremacy. So, like, this wouldn't really justify the notion that the state would be the highest human authority, i.e., if another body could, maximize utility even more, they wouldn't be the highest, quote unquote, station of authority. And with those two pillars being pretty big aspects of political um, fucking authority, I fail to see how your argument would, meet these criteria.
You said that under my argument, the government would have an obligation to do only that which maximizes utility, and I can see how you would infer that from my statement. That I can think of some instances where coercion is justified if it's for like the overall benefit of society, but it's not. I just want to be clear: it is not the only condition for like I think what the government is obligated to do so. I'm not saying, and there's like some debate over whether this like normative theory is consequentialist or not. I mean, I guess you could just say it is, but I'm not talking about utilitarianism or anything. I'm just more so like for the most part, I would agree with libertarian norms, but there's a certain thresholds where I would say I think this would like maximize utility. I think most people would have preferences for like a threshold of coercion. I think some people are going to have preferences for the government to step in certain degrees, even if it does violate like where like more deontological libertarian norms. So I'm not saying I'm a consequentialist. I'm not saying like I just want the government to maximize utility in all cases. That's definitely not what I'm saying. I'm just more so taking like a threshold deontological approach to I guess the government. I could still be a minarchist to some degree, but I look at a society and where we have like a government that contradicts libertarian norms, and then I look at a society that has a government that complies to libertarian norms, and I think one of them has more benefits than the other. I think most people would prefer the other one. So once we have like a majority of people who actually prefer the society which with the government that contradicts libertarian norms, and as an anti-realist who does take into consideration people's preferences and desires significantly more than I guess more deontological natures of libertarian norms, I would just see no reason to like go with a society where everybody obviously has preferences against this.
I mean, are you asserting an argument for political legitimacy or obligation?
More so obligation. I don't even know what political legitimacy is.
Oh, just saying like this that exists of like um a special moral authority to enact laws and coerce people into following them. Well, if you're just trying to make an argument for political obligation, well, I think like your big problem would be putting it into premissi and conclusion format. So, can you try to do that?
Sure. I could work on something, but I guess maybe we could clarify some things because when I say obligation, there's a lot of like vagueness to that. So I'd say the government has an obligation to ensure, I guess, the reasonable safety of its citizens, to ensure like it upholds its rights. And when I say obligation in this
Political
context,
obligation.
sorry, what was that?
Political obligation. Political obligation would refer to like individuals' obligation to obey the state.
Oh, okay. So it's not the government's obligation to the citizens; it's the citizens' obligation to the government.
Yeah, the government's obligation to the citizen to the citizen would arise out of like legitimacy. And like I mean, there actually like there isn't really many cases of like some state's obligation to the constituents, and this is shown to be like the case time and time again. Like we actually observe this to be one of like the biggest problems with our society, and as we see it. So like when we're looking at like valid consent, do you know what that is?
Sorry, what valid consent? And then I thought you were going to say consensus.
Oh, valid consent. So like a valid agreement. So
Oh
like
yeah,
valid
like
consent
more like
requires.
a contract in economics.
Yeah, and this is also applicable to like say like like an obligation the state has to its constituents or the constituents have to the state. And what we observe is necessary for valid consent would boil down to like a couple of things, but the only one of relevance in which I would be um, mentioning would be like the fact that contracts create mutual conditional obligations. So like both parties would be obligated to do something for one another. But like what we see like a big problem would be the absence of like mutual obligations. So like the state actually doesn't uphold like obligations to their constituents in reality. So we can look at like Warren versus like the District of Columbia. So this was a case where like three women fucking sued the DC Police Department for like the failure to protect them from a pair of criminals who broke into their apartment. And then like it got deliberated, and because like in tort law there are like four conditions for liability. Like you had a duty to someone, you breached that duty, they suffered harm, their breach of duty was the cause of the harm. So this is kind of what they argued, but then the result of this was the judge just missed the case entirely on the grounds that the government had no duty to protect the women. So like this happens time and time and time again. Like we'd also look at like Hartsletter versus like the city of San Jose, or like Riss versus New York, or Dunsany versus Winnebago County. Like it's just upheld time and time again that there actually isn't an obligation from the state to the constituents. So
Well, I do want to be
I don't
clear.
understand what
I'm
you'd
definitely not
exactly be
advocating for the
that question.
society that we live in now, or like the government's legitimacy as it is in the United States as it is right now. That's not what I'm arguing for. I'm just more so at a principle, more so questioning or skeptical about like the strict notions of like libertarian norms to the point where like the state has like almost little to no involvement. That's what I'd be more skeptical about. And I think this is important because this position doesn't commit me towards like acknowledging what kind of state we have now and saying okay, having to explain things or justify things that the state does now. I could just like agree and say look, I think a lot of these things are unjustified. I actually take more of like a minarchist view in economics and even just like I guess social policy. So I'm not that far away from libertarianism. I'm just not going to like extremely take away all the bullets to the point where like I think we start to lose like more utility than it would be worth from like obeying these like hypothetical like libertarian norms. Hypothetical, not in the like not in the logical sense, but yeah, the libertarian norms. So um, what that commits me to do is that I don't have to say that okay, the woman or like these women would be able to sue the government for not protecting her. I think that's crazy. I don't think the government has an obligation to completely monitor everyone's houses. But this would be more akin to saying like, I don't have an obligation to like save babies drowning in pools. But if it was the case that the government, similar to me standing next to a pool, was standing right next to the woman, it could have easily at no cost. Well, at little cost, I'll say little cost. At very little cost, save the women from I don't know being like tortured or like having their property stolen or even harmed in the process. If it costs them very little cost, I say that they actually do have an obligation to sacrifice a little bit of their well-being for the overall like immensely significantly more well-being of the women. So there's a certain point where I'd say hey, that's fucked up, you shouldn't have like just stood there watching. In the same sense, I would say if you saw a baby drowning in a pool, like yeah, get them out of the pool. Like that's a little cost to you.
Yeah, I mean, no, I agree with you on that point. That was more so I thought you were just advocating for, like a system in which we'd live in. But I was just more so noting the fact that we actually don't observe an obligation to the state to its constituents. Like, there's other cases that I went into that would be, analogous to this little to no cost, pull the baby out of the pool. And the government didn't pull the metaphorical baby out of the pool, and then the court still ruled that and said that they didn't have an obligation to. So that's more so what I was denoting. But like, what like libertarian policy views do you disagree with? So I mean, like, all that like libertarian, like generally, all that libertarians would disagree with would be like legal paternalism, like legal moralism, social welfare programs, rent seeking, and immigration restrictions.
I
Like,
think
there's just
I think a
top of my head.
society without like taxes could be an example. Um, I'm not sure what that would look like. Maybe I'm just not educated enough on economics to understand that hey, we can actually live without taxes, but it seems pretty crucial towards the society that we have now and almost like every society we have. Um, and because I support to a very small degree the existence of a government which would under libertarianism would be defined as unjustified, or at least the way that they defined it, I'm in support of that hypothetical unjustified government. And so I'm in support of their existence, which means I'm in support of like the necessary conditions for them to exist. And seeing as one of the necessary conditions is going to be like a little contribution of like taxes every now and then, I would also be support of that. But the taxes in my I guess my hypothetical society, they're not going to be nearly as large as the taxes we have now. The government's not going to be nearly as large as the one we have now. It's going to be almost identical towards a libertarian society, but it's just me as someone who denies complete libertarian norms to the point where like I think you get into like really weird reductios. There's a certain point where I just see no reason at all to accept it, and we could easily alter it by just not biting like all these bullets, not staying completely like I don't want to say logically consistent, but completely logically
Well,
consistent for
yeah,
to the
you
point where I
can't say
lose society. Yeah.
can't. That's right. That's right. That's like, see, that's my contention as well. I actually agree with you on that. You can't stay logically consistent to justify taxation, and like the only real whim in which I've thought up of would be, well, it's quite obvious that this would provide some baseline benefit that is probably necessary, based upon the conclusions of some pretty absurd reductives if it were not the case. But then when we actually look at arguments for taxation, like they're all like pretty like poor. If we just look at arguments for political obligation as a whole from the constituents to like presumed authority, they're all pretty poor. And then there seems to exist problems with democracy as well inherently. We seem to be able to make equivalencies between taxation and forced labor. There doesn't seem to be really any justified reasoning for taxation apart from some
That's a
utility in
pretty
which it would
interesting word.
generate.
What did you mean by justify there?
What's up?
That was a pretty interesting word you used there. Justify. I'm afraid I'm not familiar with it. Can you elaborate what that is?
Oh my God, what did I say?
Oh, you said you said there's not a way to justify taxation. Uh, that just sounded like gibberish. What does justify mean?
Well, yeah, I can't think of a logic and sound argument to justify taxation.
To what taxation? You wanted to do
I,
what to taxation?
I'd be interested in like an argument that is both valid and sound to justify taxation, and I don't believe that an
Wait, sorry,
argument that is valid and
maybe
sound.
my internet is cutting out, but you wanted to do an argument that is valid and sound to do what to taxation?
I would like a argument that is valid and sound that ends in the conclusion that taxation is permissible.
Oh, okay, permissible. I mean, I could just like give permission. I'd say, look, you have my permission to tax these people. I mean, that's what I would say.
You could give permission.
Yeah, I could give permission.
Yeah. Now, can you justify your political authority?
Part of me dies every time I hear that word. Um, no, I
Bro,
was
why do you
actually in
hate
a
that fucking
conversation
word so much?
recently where I had to define it, and I just came up with like the most random shit. And then, because I thought about it, I've had to like define it before. I was like, yeah, I can't do it. I don't really know what justification even means in normative language. Like I know what it means in like logical language.
Oh, okay. Look, I mean, the moment. Listen, if you could do you have an argument for taxation?
For taxation, I could probably think of one. Like, um, I'd probably start with the premise, and then maybe later I could give arguments for this premise. We can go down that dialogue process, but premise one, the state is necessary for a moral society. Premise two, the necessaries for a moral society is also moral. Premise three, taxes are necessary for the necessity for a moral society. Conclusion, taxes are moral.
Okay, now could an argument for that would justify, if I can just assume what that word means, for individuals paying said taxes?
For individuals paying the taxes, I think justification. I'll
I've
just
been
assume that
obligated
it's
to pay.
something
Obligated to
that's
pay.
Yeah, something that's conducive towards a moral state of affairs, which is almost identical towards my definition of obligation. So something that would obligate the people to pay taxes is because if you pay taxes, it is crucial for a more moral state of affairs. And I think you have obligations by definition to motivate yourself towards actions that are conducive towards more moral state of affairs. And so if that's true, then the actions themselves, which would include taxes, you also have an obligation to, because obligation just means motivating reasons to exist in a moral state of affairs or to realize a moral state of affairs.
So I mean, I think like the big issue. I mean, if you were like saying that like if your like first argument for like the permissibility of taxation would just be so like some benefit produced for society, and then your argument for why individuals would possess some obligation to pay said taxes. Well, it almost seems as if like you just inherently um, be saying that. Well, there's like a couple issues with this. That there would have to exist like some form of consent to pay said taxes. Would you agree with this?
No, absolutely not.
So you would say that like individuals should pay said taxes without consent, or
Yeah,
you're saying that
independent.
individuals would have to
I,
like withdraw themselves from the benefits
I,
offered from the society and their taxes? You're saying that individuals, you're saying that you would not value explicit dissent over implicit consent, and that there's no effective way of opting out of said benefits as provided by the society. I think that it's just really important to denote here, within the confines of taxation, that we first realize like the true problems that it would exist within any given political authority or government or state. I think that if we would have to like first assume some form of a social contract and then like assume some notion of consent towards a social contract. And I think you would be unable to justify valid consent asserted for said social contract. Therefore, like while your arguments may be logic and sound in nature, they would not substantiate the notion that individuals would have said obligation because the social contract in of itself would not possess valid consent.
well, this is the issue. I think obligation exists independent of consent. Like I think, and maybe you could have obligations to like maybe consensually, or consensually pay your taxes, but I mean that's not. I mean, if we make
Well, I
ought
know
claims,
more
that
so what
like
I'm
kind of presupposes that you
what I'm
can do
asserting is
something
that
because ought implies can. But I mean, I'm gonna make a society where you don't really have the ability to choose. So I wouldn't say like you can choose not to pay taxes. So I wouldn't really say you have an obligation to do it. I would just say, and that's like a strict like logical sense. But I think you have an obligation not to go against the laws that I'm stipulating. One's for a moral society. Then I'd say yeah, you have an obligation to pay taxes.
well, I think more so what I'm asserting is that like this individual would not be just under the pretense that the social contract as a whole isn't just. So like we could just look at like the terms of said social contract. So like the government would protect individual from private criminals and foreign governments, and then the people got to like obey the laws and pay the taxes, and that's what leads to that said authority. And would you like assert that this would be like some form of like explicit social contract, implicit social construct, or hypothetical social construct? That social contract that would be going to be your next step. I'm assuming that like you would assume there to exist some form of hypothetical social contract, right?
I think the only purpose I see in social constructs is going to be maybe some evidence that counts in favor of like understanding terms and conditions. So like the only purpose I see for social constructs would be more so in applied ethics would be like if there's a social construct that you're not going to pay $10,000 for a donut that you buy at a bakery or that you already purchased at a bakery before leaving, then it's wrong of you to like charge somebody $1,000 after they like purchased a donut and they already ate it, because it's like one of those stores where like you eat the donut then you leave and then you pay the bill. It's wrong to like increase the bill to like $10,000. I think that's wrong. That's an example of like a social construct that I would see purposeful, but outside
Oh,
of
contract.
those I
Yeah,
don't really.
that's an implicit. Well, no, what I'm also asking you is like what form of social contract would like government exist under? So what you just like what you just denoted would be like the violation of like an implicit social contract, which was basically just like an agreement is implied in one's behavior. So like it'd be implied in the behavior of going to a donut shop that you'd expect to pay a certain amount. And like this may be some weird like combination of like also hypothetical consent. So basically, hypothetically assuming that if an individual knew how much they'd pay for said donuts, that they'd be okay with paying for said donut, and this would be based upon like the behaviors observed within the society, and well, obviously, if they were to hypothetically assume if one would want to pay $1,000, well, they obviously want it. Therefore, this would breach the confines of hypothetical social contract. But more so, what I'm asking, it didn't really have to do with like some form of social contract. But like, what form of social contract do you think government is?
Well, I think the government, I think it has like properties. I don't know if I have to like necessarily choose like one or the other, but it seems like it would have properties of like multiple. I think some of them can be explicit with like things like the Constitution, and then you could also have implicit interpretations of the explicit contracts. So like if they say don't aggress upon somebody, aggression is like well, you're gonna have to like intuit what that is. It's gonna be sort of implicit. So I think it has natures of like multiple forms of contract or social contracts. So I'm not too sure about like the hypothetical contract. I need more clarification on what that is. But overall, I don't really see. I mean, I guess it just seems like it would also apply.
Okay. Well, I would definitely have a little bit some issues if you were able to deem that, but that's okay. Well, I mean, I just think like regardless of said form of social contract, there's like big issues with why I think said social contract of like a government in relation to their duties alongside the duties of the people would be like unjust, would be out of like the problems of said social contract. I think like the first one is going to be there's no way of opting out of the social contract or like of this government, and then like the state obviously like refuses to recognize explicit dissent, and then there's unconditional imposition, and then there's also like the absence of mutual obligation. And I think out of respect for these four principles, we would show that this social contract would be unjust. Therefore, we would see a failure to, substantiate the notion that individuals would have an obligation to obey the laws and pay taxes, because the principles for a valid agreement are not met.
If it was the case that the government included like the mutual obligations, would it then be just?
Well, they included things such as mutual obligations, and there was like no unconditional opposition, and they valued explicit dissent at least more so than alleged implicit consent, in a reasonable way of opting out, apart from moving to Antarctica. Yeah, of course. Then I think people would definitely have an obligation to obey the laws and to pay taxes.
Well, it seems like obligation is also going to include like the other conditions that you laid out, if those other conditions are in fact moral. So I guess what I'm getting at is like if it's successful that it requires like or it implies a mutual obligation, would you be able to entail like I guess those other conditions that you laid out?
Well, no. I mean, all that like mutual obligation would assert is that both parties are obligated to do something for each other, and that if one like party like repudiates as part of the deal, then the other party's not bound to hold up their end of the deal either. I mean, but this is only like one facet or principle of valid agreement. For example, um, like explicit dissent would be valued in the sense of you say you don't agree, then you don't agree, or like unconditional position would just say if you know that X is going to be imposed on you whether you do A or not, then you are doing A doesn't count to agreeing to X. And then of course I feel like just valid consent requires a reasonable way of opting out, and then there's no reasonable way of opting out of said social contract. So
Well,
I mean, like those are like the four said pillars or principles for valid agreements, and I don't find these to be met. Therefore, I find it to be wrong
wait, can you
or
can you
unjust.
define explicit dissent one more time?
Yeah, sure. So if you say you don't agree, they will still impose all the same laws on you. And explicit dissent is you just verbally stating that you dissent yourself from said agreement, but they don't care because they're just still gonna like you know impose the same laws on you.
Yeah, I don't think these other conditions like explicit dissent are going to be like true in cases like if you saw a baby drowning in a pool. I think that situation can exist independent of these other conditions, but it seems like in this specific case, you do in fact have an obligation, and I think this is also an issue that I was trying to get at earlier. When you say that these are the conditions for like a social construct to be just, I understand just, and I'm trying my best to just intuit what the word means. It seems like it's almost going to be synonymous with obligation. Like whenever I try to define justification in a normative sense, I'm just going to talk about something that like I don't know something that's conducive towards a moral state of affairs, and then it's almost exactly my definition for obligation. So I just look at situations that under my understanding it's going to be justified, but it's not going to be inclusive of all these conditions, but only the obligation one.
Right, but I wouldn't. I mean, I wouldn't attempt to justify saving said drowning baby out of a social contract. That sounds quite silly. I mean, I'd like me personally. I just hold the Rothschild pluralism, and I'll justify that as a duty for beneficence. So I mean,
Wait,
like,
duty for
I
what?
mean, I don't know. Like, I don't think that, like a contract is going to be like an agreement, and an agreement would like imply two bodies. So I fail to see the analogy in which you're drawing to like a drowning baby.
Yeah, exactly. There's not two bodies. There's one actor, and then there's like another like a physical human body, but he's not a moral agent. This child is like drowning. He's not an actor. He can't make contracts. But I'd say in this situation, there's only one moral agent. There's only one actor. There's only one body. I think that body has an obligation independent of these other conditions that you've laid out.
Right, but I feel like what you were like defining would not be like an obligation born from social contract.
Born of the social contract, and what would the social contract be?
No, I said like this obligation to save the drowning baby would not be born from social contract.
Wait, are you saying it's not going to be formed from a social construct under my view or yours?
Contract.
Yeah, contract.
Yeah, I don't think so. Definitely not under my view. I fail to see how it would be born under yours.
Well, sorry, well, the conditions that you laid out, such as like explicit descent, mutual moral obligation, or like mutual obligation to a contract, it seems like these are like the conditions that you laid out for like a government's relation to be justified. And so, I mean, it would be the conditions for justification. But it seems like this situation doesn't meet your conditions for justification. It only meets It only meets the obligatory one.
Well, yeah, but the big difference is that the obligation for individuals to obey laws and obey taxes would be born from the social contract.
Okay, so
When
you are
in
saying it
like
would be born from the social contract.
yeah, and then in the case of the baby, I'm gonna say this obligation would not be born out of social contract
Well,
because I
I'm
fail to
talking
see
about the baby. So, are you saying that the obligation to the baby is going to be born of social construct or not of social construct or social
not
contract?
of not of
Okay,
social contract.
can I ask like what the derivative for the obligation is,
Yeah, just I hold the Rossian pluralism.
and then what is that?
It's some like threshold deontic view. It's like a normative stance, normative framework.
Wait, you understand? I'm,
You just
I'm
have like
arguing for threshold deontology right now to negate libertarian norms.
what's up?
I'm using threshold deontology to contend with libertarian norms.
No, like all I'm contending is the fact that there's no valid obligation built off of the basis of social contract from the people to obey the laws and to pay taxes.
Okay, wait. So there's not a valid obligation to save the child, right?
No, because I'm not. I'm not saying that this obligation would be form of social contract.
Okay, wait. So if there's not a valid obligation, can we still like punish the guy for like letting the child die? Because under my society, I'd punish him. He's going to jail.
Oh well, I mean, wait, what's that? Say that again.
Yeah, let's say the guy just like watched the child drown. Under my society, he's going to jail because of threshold deontology. I think it's good. It passed a certain threshold of like utility to like throw him in jail so that people don't let children starve or like just drown. So under your society, if you agree that it's not a valid obligation, which like you verbatim say, are you going to have legislation that like supports non-valid obligations?
Oh well, you're looking at like two different forms of obligation. No, this is like a valid agreement between an individual and the state for an individual to participate in said state. And I think like you're conflating like I think that we're just getting lost in translation here because we're just talking about like two different things, right? So like we're completely just talking about individuals' participation in the state. That's all, right? That's completely what I'm talking about. And basically, what I'm asserting is that there is no real obligation for an individual to like obey said laws and pay taxes born from social contract, because the principles for valid agreements are not met by the state. I think that we would still like see some form of like like moral obligation that would not be born out of said like social contract.
Some moral obligation, and then is the state going to abide to these moral obligations that are not born of social contracts or even like valid contracts?
Well, I mean, like I think that's what we observe, but like once again, like when we're talking about obligation, we're not talking about a state's obligation to protect its citizens, etc. We're talking about an individual's obligation to uphold the standards of the state. I feel like we're unironically just talking about two different things here because you continue to refer to the state and their actions when like I'm just simply in reference to individuals and their actions, like for or against the state. So like once again, just like there's like problems with like the social contract and what we see, and this is all in reference to mainly like,
Well,
taxation. Like I think it's immoral for like the state to tax people because people don't have a way to opt out of taxation. People can't dissent from the taxation. Um,
Well, I
and
guess
if you
going
don't
back to like
accept,
what you said before, I don't really see too much of a distinction between the two obligations because under my understanding of obligation, it's going to be true independent of the party. So I think obligations are just like reasons to realize a moral state of affairs. So if you have reasons to realize a more moral state of affairs, I don't think one state of affairs is going to be moral for the government, but not moral for the citizens. So regardless of like whose obligation I'm talking about, it's going to be true of the other party as well.
yeah, I fail to see your point. Say that again?
Well, you say that we're talking about two different concepts because you're talking about the citizens' obligation to the government, and I'm talking about the government's obligation to the citizens. I think if it's the case that the government has an obligation to do X, Y, Z to the citizens, then I think it also entails that the citizens also have the obligation to do X, Y, Z with the government because my definition of obligation is independent of like which party's perspective we're talking about.
Oh yeah, no, and I'm completely disagreeing with that notion, out of virtue for the fact that I don't think that this obligation should be respected, because there's no valid agreement.
Yeah, and then if there's no valid agreement, and you agree that there's no valid agreement in the case where like the man just watched the baby drown, you'd say the government doesn't have an obligation to do that. Or unless are you saying that the government does have an obligation but the man doesn't, or are you saying that the man has an obligation but the government doesn't?
Well, again, like there's no like what social contract is asserted between this man and the baby.
I don't even know what social contract means in this context. I'm just saying, look, I think it's an
Yeah,
obligation to realize the moral state of affairs.
I completely like I don't even know what you're talking about. Like I don't even know what you mean by social contract in this either, right? Like
Well, I didn't
we're
use
just
the
like
term
we're
social contract.
so.
Look, I'm not look if like I don't know what you mean by social contract. You don't know what I mean because well, one, I'm not using it.
Oh,
So
yeah.
let's just
In terms of
get
it,
rid of the word. I'm just
sure,
asking,
I can tell you what I mean.
does the man have an obligation to save the child?
Yeah, I'd say you'd have a moral obligation.
Okay, good. And if he contradicts the obligation, ought there be punishments?
Mm, yeah.
Okay, so if it's the case that there ought to be punishments and the government has means to imply punishments, then it seems like the government ought to imply punishments. And I think the government ought to do what they ought to do. So therefore, I think they ought to imply punishments, which contradicts libertarian norms.
Not necessarily like libertarianism is that like follow under it. Like when I reference libertarianism, like I just hold to a couple principles. Like I don't think that like I think there's going to be a huge symmetry breaker between like individuals like obligation to obey said law and like a state's obligation to enforce said law, right? And like when we talk about like moral ramifications of actions and consideration to like imprisonment or uh, police, etc. Like these are the things in which we would be able to observe even without like the special moral authority of the state. So I don't think like the state is like super relevant to the question. But like libertarianism, just like this would like assert like a couple policy views of mine. Like I just think that like legal paternalism is bad. I don't think like I think that the government restricts people for their like. I don't think that like the government quote unquote restricting people for their own good is good. I also don't agree with like legal moralism. Like the government prohibits immoral but victimless activities. Like I think that's bad. And then I think like some social welfare programs are bad. I'm like kind of agnostic on that. And
Oh
then
yeah,
there's like a
I
few
don't
other.
agree with like the majority of things you said there.
Yeah, so what do you think that legal paternalism is bad or is okay?
No, I'm saying I don't agree either. Like everything you say that you disagree with, I'm saying yeah, I don't hold those beliefs either.
Yeah, so I mean, these are just like the policy views in which I'd hold, which would be classified as libertarian. So I would assert myself as a libertarian. I would probably hold to like some minimal government philosophy. Like I agree with the notion that like the government should protect individuals' negative rights. But I also agree to some extent that individuals should uphold like positive obligations as well, just because of the threshold deontic.
Yeah. So I guess just be clear, independent of like what kind of obligation we're talking about. You agree that the man ought to be punished if he lets the child drown in the pool, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
but
okay, good.
this doesn't
So
feel like quote unquote
I
immoral
take the same
activity.
concept and I just say I think I think you ought to be punished if you don't pay taxes. So I guess what I'm saying is like there's little cost to you for a obviously there's little cost for the man to save the child, little cost to him for like a net like massively significant utility. And so I think paying taxes also has the same properties. It's little cost to you and you're also like saving like almost your entire nation from like going into complete like chaos or anarchy or like a bunch of like weird reductios that I don't think anyone wants to fight. So I'm okay with punishing people for not paying these little costs, even though if they don't have like personal obligations or if it contradicts like some deontological nature. Because I think me and you are both threshold deontologists. So under that notion, I see reasons for taxes.
Like yeah, so that's just like some form of rule consequentialism, which I don't really like. So that just kind of like asserts that like the state produces very large benefits, and for the state to produce these benefits, individuals must obey the state. If people must like do acts or like pay taxes to produce some very large benefit, then they're obligated to do so. So individuals are obligated to obey the state in this regard. But I don't necessarily find this to be justified. Because like there's gonna be like a couple critiques of this. Um,
Well, I guess
like like
I don't really
individuals have no.
understand the critiques so far. So maybe a name the trait dialogue process would work better. So
So how about
can
this?
you
How about this? How about this? Society won't collapse if I don't pay taxes.
wait? Sorry, what was that?
Yeah, that's a critique. Society's not going to collapse if I don't pay taxes.
Oh well, I mean our definitions of collapse is going to be kind of different. I think a road. I think a world where we don't have like roads and people can drive on them. I think that's yeah. I think that's bad. Maybe we get to a point where like you
Right.
have to pay to like be on the road and no one's going to fix them.
Nothing. Nothing.
I think that's also
Nothing's
bad.
going to change if I don't. Nothing's going to change if I disobey a law.
Nothing's going to change.
Yeah, if I don't pay taxes, nothing's going to change. We'll be good. We'll be fine.
Well, what is going to change is that the government state is going to be in a state of non-existence.
No, no. If I don't pay taxes, the government is going to exist.
The government is going to exist, but wait, Dean, you have to realize the government actually contacted me personally and said, "Hey, you're friends with Dean. Make sure Dean pays his taxes, all right? Because Dean's are like our last straw. So if Dean stops paying taxes, like we're just down, okay? We're like we already donated to Ukraine, Palestine. We're just really counting on Dean Withers to like pay his taxes. So make sure he does that. And so yeah, I think you should.
Oh, it seems as if what we've just concluded is that if you're the last straw, or if you not paying taxes would make the government collapse, that you'd have some obligation to, and it seems as if you just denoted this in of it yourself. However, what we observe is this is not the case. So it seems as if, even under your own worldview, the big issue being is the fact that only a certain percentage or like a majority of society would have to uphold the obligation to pay taxes for society not to collapse.
I don't think that's what I'm saying because I think what you're trying to get at is like more. You could ask the question, oh, why doesn't society just, or why doesn't the government just tax like a few, like let's say $10,000 are required for the government to exist, just for like a month or something. Um, why doesn't the government just charge like $500 or well yeah let's say $1,000 from like 10 people, or we could say that they're going to charge 1,000 or 10,000 people $1, and then they would meet the necessary conditions, and then there's shared utility loss, and then there's shared utility benefit, and people are also going to benefit from the contributions. It's almost like a forced purchase. So it doesn't make a lot of sense even to the libertarian to like force someone to purchase labor for somebody else. I think it just makes more sense to like force everybody to purchase the necessary conditions for the universally shared benefits or utility, because there's universal utility, and so for the universal like or at least purchase, you're gonna have to like universally apply the conditions.
I fail to see that to be the case because it seems as if even under your own worldview that we ought to do what is socially necessary to uphold society, and what is socially necessary would contradict said universal principle.
Wait, I don't think we should just do like what's socially necessary. Like I think you could also gain utility, because I think I can look at one world and where like you only charge like 10 people $1,000, or you charge like 10,000 people each $1, and I think one of them is actually more moral than the other one. I think it's moral to like charge people for the utility that you're providing equally, because they're equally getting. It's like saying like um equal people are getting like some entailment, therefore equal people should like pay the antecedent, and then that just makes sense.
Oh, so now you're saying that like individuals have to pay taxes because they reap the benefits from the state?
Yeah, of course.
Well, yeah. Well, it seems as if um, they cannot not reap the benefits from the state because an explicit dissent doesn't exist under our societal social contract, and they can't really like move from the state or like deny the services of the state or opt out of the services
Yeah,
of the state.
you're just saying that it's
Therefore,
not
we're
possible
basically
to
just
like
going
not
to see
receive
this
an
as a form
entailment,
of
and I
force.
think to me that just interprets as it's also not possible for them to like surrender the antecedent. Like this is true.
What's the antecedent?
Antecedent like P entails Q, P is the antecedent. Like P is the contingent fact. The antecedent is just a contingent fact. So if it's contingent that you pay taxes, you get an entailment. And if the entailment is universal, then it seems like the antecedent ought to also be universal.
Well, like I just disagree with the whole notion that like it is like I like again like once again I just disagree with the whole notion. Like I think you ought to be able to opt out of said contract. Like this seems like a property of a valid agreement.
Well,
Like if you don't want to pay taxes, like if you don't want to pay taxes, you're also gonna have to deal with the fact that you no longer reap said benefits of the state. But this seems like a pretty respectable, pinnacle valid agreement.
well, with the contract, you also have the existence of the state, which protects you from like having your dead body get like molested. It also protects you from like being kicked off of the road because it's not privatized, and then you can't go to your job because there's no road. Um, I think the contract entails like some sort of a significantly better moral society, and I think if you have obligations to moral societies, then you also have an obligation to pay taxes.
No, we'd see a significantly better society than like the natural state or everything being privatized. But if we could offer some better alternative than said states, such as a libertarian state with minimal coercement to assure, what would be socially necessary, and the the like some like public entities existing, such as small taxation for
Right.
roads,
Do you think the
etc.
justice system is also going to be justified? Or sorry, do you think the justice system is also going to be privatized?
Actually, I don't really see like too huge of a problem with that.
Well, I guess more so, I'm just asking. I think the problem would come from like, okay, what are your means of like acquiring like the justice system? Like, Like you live in a world where like if you're like really broke and you don't have any money, um, and then you also get like violated on the street, like you get like attacked on the street, the police are still gonna save you. Still gonna be like compensation. Or you could look at a world where like you're too broke to afford the justice system, and then you're just like open. So you're open to like rights violations because you couldn't afford the REA.
Well, it's implied that a libertarian state would protect individuals' negative rights. I
It's
thought that you were
implied.
more so like talking.
Wait, how do we
I
know?
thought that you were more
How do we know that
so,
they're gonna
like
do that?
other
Oh,
like other forms of upholding positive obligation through a justice system. I thought you'd just it'd be implied that even a libertarian state would uphold protections for negative rights.
well, you mean it would uphold the negative rights like the state would, like the state of anarcho-capitalism would, or like complete like libertarianism. It is implied that it would uphold those rights, but the people that live in it aren't like necessarily going to. Like you're gonna have to spend money in order to get the police to like function as a unit of force.
Yeah, it seems as if we do that already.
Yeah, we do it with taxes. Good job.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I know.
yeah, taxes are
So,
good.
I mean, and actually, like, I don't know. So this is like when we would get into like some minimal social welfare, which I already denoted earlier. I don't necessarily disagree with, but I'm agnostic on it. So I'm open to the idea of like minimal social welfare, or in other words, like minimal taxation. But I just think like more so my bigger issues with taxation uh, would just come along the lines of it's equivalent to forced labor, but you know,
If you want to call taxation just like universal social welfare, and by the way, if you don't participate in the social welfare, you get like thrown in jail. But we don't have to get into the weeds. Yeah, it looks like we agree.
I just yeah, I think that there's gonna be like some social welfare, which just seems like intuitively correct to me. Like I mean, I disagree with a lot of it. I do think that like one of the bigger pillars of social welfare that I do agree with would be said, justice system, like the justice system. I think that a lot of libertarians will actually just be like, oh yeah, fuck it, people got to pay for it. Theory of entitlement, baby. Fucking yeah, no. Why the fuck would they have an obligation to do that? I mean, and then why would you be entitled from this if you didn't have just means of acquisition, etc. Like like there's actually like a lot of arguments that could be used to justify the notion that the justice system should be privatized. I just personally don't think it should.
Yeah, and then they would also have to bite the bullet. And this is, I guess, one of my main issues with libertarianism, and I'm still not sure if it's going to be entailed under your form or not. But essentially, it's where like without a state or like government lines, you kind of get like these individual independent societies, and those independent societies are going to have like terms to like actually like fucking live in the society. For like this is like a weird reductio, like where you have to like suck the mayor's dick for everybody who like goes into the society like every day, and like obviously that's a bad one. You could agree to do it, or you could like leave the society and then like fend for yourself in the woods. That's also like, just a weird reductio that I'm not quite sure if like a society without taxes can avoid like completely avoid.
Oh, I think that reductio. I don't know. Maybe doesn't have as good of grounds because we could also view like forced participation from like a highly undesirable quote unquote choice. I think it's implied that like there must be a reasonable way of opting out, or like the criterion which must be met in order to uphold
Well,
or
yeah,
the
but
intrinsic
considering
right.
the conditions, only like a communist would say that it was forced. Like the libertarian and capitalist would have to say that, oh, that was a contract, that wasn't forced.
Actually, Humor would disagree.
Well, it seems like humor is contradicting like libertarianism. I don't know. I
Well,
haven't
no,
read like I don't really keep up with them. Like,
Well, he went over like we were talking about it a bit. He was like, if like you have like two options and you would technically have a choice to not engage in something, but like the alternative choice is really, really, really poor, then this would equivocate to being forced and to engage in the better choice.
oh,
Such
depends.
as
Like,
actually he gave was pay taxes or go live in the middle of the woods. It's actually yeah, that was actually the equivalence that he made.
Well, I don't really see that bridge here, but yeah, it doesn't really seem consistent, to be honest. Like, I don't think this is like logically consistent with the conditions of like contracts that libertarianism advocates for.
Well, who knows? We could talk about it more as I learn more about it. In fact,
Yeah.
everything that I had conversation with you about, I really started looking into for the first time today at about 1 p.m.
Oh damn.
So fucking just learning more. I don't know. It's a fast moving class. It's having fun. Had a test today. Just forgot to study for it. So then I started studying like crazy at 1. Took a lot out of it. I don't know. Libertarianism is pretty interesting. I think
Yeah.
it's pretty based, or at least there's a lot of properties of it that are pretty based.
I'm kind of like a diet libertarian, or just like I don't agree with like the complete norms.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm probably somewhere in the middle, like as well. Like I don't know. I think like I do agree with you on the fact that I don't think political authority exists. Like I don't think that there's any special moral authority of you know government body. And then there's the unreasonable ways. Are there there's not really any good way to opt out of said political authority. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm
I thought
I'm
the
probably
conversation was gonna go on like more to meta ethics, and I was, dude, I was so ready for that.
yeah, fuck you. I very intentionally stayed away from it ethics, bitch.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, bro. No, you got me fucked up if you think I'm gonna talk about meta ethics with you.
Dude, I still need to talk to this guy named
Someone
Evan.
say meta ethics?
Oh, we said meta ethics. What are your views?
Come on, lucario, let's go.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on moral realism?
Nope, you're not doing that. Nope.
Oh, well, it seems like I am doing it. So, when you identify the fact that
No.
when you say
Nope.
that,
I'm not,
well,
bro.
you're identifying something. So I am doing it. But then you also like performatively say that
Oh
I'm
my
not doing it.
god,
So do you want to
bro.
accept the contradiction? Yeah, that's what I thought.
What,
Nothing.
bro? Wait, no, wait. What's your issue with moral realism? I want to
My
hear
issue
it.
with
Come
moral
on, let's go.
realism, it's that I don't know if I want to call it a contradiction, but or if I just don't have the concept of categorical norms. It just seems like something that is normative implies a relative end goal, and so if we when you say that it's categorical, you're saying it's not relative. It seems like you're saying something that is it's not relative, but it is relative at the same time, and that makes no sense to me.
So like,
And if that language is like idiosyncratic, I can like say stance independent reasons make no sense because I think reasons are by definition something that is like dependent on the stance. It has to be a reason for something. And that something is a variable. It's inherently a variable. So it seems like to say that it's not a variable, but it's also a reason for a variable. I mean that also doesn't make sense.
it's like the scenario I'm bringing is like the torturing babies. Like, what is like what's the variable like that makes it like wrong and like not wrong?
Um I could go a couple ways about this. One that's more appealing to people is Ayn Rand's view, and you just say, like, the baby's a rational entity. You have desires as a rational entity not to be tortured, especially in cases when you're vulnerable or states that you're vulnerable. Um, and so, if it's a case that you don't want to be like violated when you're like in a vulnerable state as a rational entity, you have the ability to make a contract stipulating that, hey, don't violate me when I'm a child, and I won't violate anybody else's child. And if it's the case that you expect yourself not to, I don't even have to go to expectance to be honest. Like it's objectively good for your life because all your decisions are contingent on you not being tortured as a baby. So it's good for you to make this contract. So you can contradict the contract if you want, but contradictions like don't exist. And so you weren't protected as a child. So And all of your decisions, right, as you are right now, are contingent on the fact that you weren't torched as a baby. So any decision that you make, any commitment to life that you make, inherently implies the fact that you shouldn't torch babies.
Wouldn't that support like realism?
Well,
Because you're
I
saying
think
like there's an objective
that's why she calls it
meaning or
moral.
something.
Well, yeah, she calls it objectivism, which I see what you're saying. It is objective. It is like almost realism, but it's just saying that it's not saying that it's like just stance independent. Your stance is your commitment to life, which is subjective. Your commitment to life is the thing that commits you not to torch babies, and your commitment to life is subjective. So your commitments not to torch babies is also subjective. It's really similar to moral realism, but it's just not making the contradictory claims that like a moral realist would say. And I don't think most moral realists are
Um, is there a non-zero probability that the reason for why you shouldn't torture babies is an objective reason?
Yeah, contradictions have like a
Is
zero
it a
probability of
barking
existing.
voice? Or is he like sleeping?
No, he's like sleeping meta ethics. That's the dean's on another level.
No, that's my humor voice. See, humor would just say there's a non-zero probability of there existing an objective moral reason for why you shouldn't torture the babies.
Oh yeah,
Therefore, I
I can actually give an argument for this. Premise one, contradictions have zero probability of existing. Premise two, moral realism is a contradiction. Conclusion, moral realism has zero probability of existing.
it's actually like that's probably. I mean, obviously, you're gonna have a lot of justification to do on P2, but it's like a pretty good,
Yeah,
pretty good response.
yeah. I should write a paper. I'm actually thinking about it.
Nah, you kind of should. If you could substantiate that claim,
Wait, if I should,
that would.
are you talking about a stance-dependent reason to write the paper?
Huh?
When you said I should do it, are you talking about a stance-independent reason to write the paper?
Wait,
Or are you
wait,
saying that
Oh
the
my
paper,
god.
writing the paper, is conducive to
Lucario, I have a
systematic
question.
goal?
Oh my god. It's too far down the rabbit hole, man. Fucking.
Wait, Lucario, question. Do you
Yeah.
think like moral convergence is true?
I think moral facts can change. Like just whatever view. Like actually not even objectivism, because I don't like 100% believe in it, but I'm more like just like a relativist, or like maybe an error theorist. So I don't see too much issue with moral conversions.
Well, wait. So, wait, if moral convergence is true, then wouldn't like moral facts have to exist?
Wait, what do you mean when you say moral convergence?
Yeah, like coming together to like understand like a certain truth.
I think you can because truth kind of is cashed out weird. And maybe I'll get into moral convergency later and like maybe understand what most moral convergence who believe in it would say when they may say truth. But I don't think truth necessarily means it's just like stance independently true. So I do believe in like stance dependent truths, and when you come together and you like identify truths, it can still be the case that they're stance dependent.
Have you debated humor?
Wait, what?
No, he should though. He should. I want to see that.
Have I debated
Can
who?
I set it up? Humor?
Oh, humor? Oh, no, I've never debated humor.
He wants to come on my second account. I would to get
Oh,
him
that
on
would
my
be so
second account.
cool.
Yeah, he's been asking. I've just been like forgetting to set it up, but that'd be like he unironically wants to.
Yeah, I could make a like a humor account and then get it to like 1K followers like overnight if I wanted to. That would be a nice little gift. It's like a little little compensation for like all of his works.
Oh, unironically, like he continues to ask to come on because I mentioned my platform to him once, and he just wants to sell some books.
Oh, that would be
So
such a
like,
W, dude. Imagine if like, dude, with the audience that you have, if humor gets to sell his books, I think, dude, that's like a net benefit to society. Just sell more humor books. They're so good.
Yeah, honestly, I agree with you. They're so fucking. I love that name. These classes are great.
Yeah, dude, I'm thinking about doing a troll. Well, I was thinking about it. I'm not actually gonna do it. I was thinking about doing a troll. If I'm ever in a conversation with like Michael Camber, I'm gonna ask him if like I can like pirate his books online. And if he says no, I'm just gonna ask him for the argument for intellectual property. That would be so evil.
Lucario, I got a syllogism now for you.
Oh, what's up?
Don't ask me where I got this. I'm gonna give it to you. So if moral realism is false, moral progress and convergence would not be possible. That's premise 1. Premise 2, moral progress and convergence is possible. So therefore, moral realism is true.
What are the inference rules on that?
Bro, this is like too deep
No,
into it.
I'm
Come on.
joking. It's modus tollens. That's like saying, if P, then Q. Q, or yeah, not Q, therefore not P. I honestly think moral convergence thing is going to be like a verbal dispute, to be honest. And then naturally, I'd need an argument for moral convergence.
Okay, I'll give you the source. Inspiring Philosophy, YouTube.
Oh my god.
Dean, come on. That's he makes some
You
good
know,
points though.
he doesn't hold to the classical laws of logic.